Qatar has actively supported Hamas from the beginning. It has sheltered senior Hamas leaders in Qatar. Qatar has also spent billions of dollars funding anti-Semitic radicals in the United States, infiltrating our universities. I'll tell you, it's been publicly reported. Qatar hired spies to spy on me because they see me as their leading opponent in Washington. This is a contest between good and evil. It's a contest between civilization and barbarism. And we've seen elected officials who make a choice. There's a very real, cognizable pro-Hamas contingent in the Democrat Party.
All right, everyone, welcome. Help me welcome Senator Ted Cruz here to the studio in Miami. Senator Cruz, thank you for being here.
Gabe, great to be with you. Thanks.
We're so excited to see that you're going to be down here and to be able to pull you into the studio. We've been trying to get you for a while. You're not only a U.S. Senator, but you're the host of The Verdict. It's a podcast that we like to follow and keep up to date. One thing you do there that I really appreciate, I just wanted to share with you, is as someone who likes to get in the weeds of things and not just read the headlines, you really do that. You did that this week. So really appreciate that, and I hope you continue those efforts.
Well, we do it 3 days a week and try to just break down what's going on and explain, take people behind the scenes in the Senate, behind the scenes of the White House, behind the scenes of the Supreme Court, and really just help people understand what's really happening.
Yeah, as a lawyer, I mentioned in the intro, I was a litigator for about 15 years, and I did write an amicus brief for the Supreme Court. I didn't get to litigate in front of the Supreme Court like you did, but it's just that in and of itself is such a great accomplishment, let alone the time you've had in Congress. But I'm going to be done doting, and let's just get into some questions. Today, the shutdown seems like it's coming to a close. By the time that this airs, likely the shutdown will be over. The real question I think that I was thinking about, and I know many people are, is it seems like we keep going in a cycle, and we keep going up against these shutdowns.
Yep.
What lessons can we, the Republican Party, can we, Congress, what can we learn from this shutdown, this game of chicken that was played at the expense of the American people so it doesn't happen again?
Well, the Democrat Party has been radicalized. And if you look at this shutdown, on one level, this shutdown was about Democrats trying to force taxpayer-provided health care for illegal aliens. But on another level, it wasn't even about that. What it was really about is Chuck Schumer had a political crisis. So let's rewind to March of this year. March of this year was the last time funding for the government expired. Now, to move forward with a funding bill in the Senate, it takes 60 votes under the Senate rules. We only have 53 Republicans. That means we need at least 7 Democrats to be able to fund the government.
Well, 58, because Rand Paul will vote against everything.
Unfortunately, that's the truth. So Rand votes no on everything, so we need 8 Democrats to be able to fund the government. In March, the Democrats agreed to work with the Republicans to pass what's called a clean CR, clean continuing resolution, which just keeps the government open, keeps the lights on, keeps people being paid. It doesn't change any of the funding. It just says we'll do tomorrow what we did yesterday. When the Democrats did that, Chuck Schumer almost got fired. The extreme left wing in his base was furious. And he is terrified. He's looking over his left shoulder. He's very afraid of being primaried from the left by AOC or some other radical. And so this shutdown, more than anything else, was for Schumer and the other Democrats to show to the radicals in their party that they really, really, really hate Donald Trump. And so it was political performance. They didn't get anything. They shut the government down for 43 days. And they ended up getting the same deal that they had 42 days ago. But this was all about appeasing the angry voices in their party. And the sad thing is, the next continuing resolution will expire on January 30th, and I think we can anticipate Groundhog Day, the same basic dynamic. You're going to see Schumer and the Democrats are already ripping each other apart, that they allowed the government to open now. I think that only gets worse.
How do we still call them the far left if they have such control over the mainstream Democrats? And if you look at Mamdani, who's the personification of far left, right? The young man who just won the race in New York City, I'm sure everyone listening knows about him. Just look at his endorsements when they lined up. At first, they were slow to endorse, but by the end, you had everyone from Hakeem Jeffries to Kathy Hochul behind them. Now you're saying Schumer is being controlled essentially by the far left. I mean, is there a future from your perspective? Is there a reasonable Democratic Party still at the table?
Look, that's a great question. Right now, there doesn't seem to be. And Mamdani, AOC, that's the heart of the Democrat Party. That is the face of the Democrat Party, and they look, this really started to get bad in 2016 when Trump got elected the first time. And I look back, I got elected to the Senate in 2012. When I got there in 2012, there was such a thing as moderate Democrats. There were Democrats you could work with who were reasonable. Um, when Trump came into the White House, it broke their brains. It drove them so far left, and they began endorsing really extreme positions, open borders. You look at the 4 years of open borders under Joe Biden. No Democrat before had advocated that. I joke that Biden did something I used to think was impossible. He made me miss Barack Obama. But, Obama, when he was president, on immigration, he by and large followed the immigration laws. Obama deported millions of people. Remember, the left got mad at him and called him the deporter in
I
chief?
was about to say it, yeah. They chained themselves to the White House fences.
You look at on every policy issue, the Democrats have gone on immigration, they're for full-on open borders. On law enforcement, they're for abolishing the police. You look at on transgender issues, they're for men and women's sports and boys and girls sports. They're for the sterilization and mutilation of kids. Those are not mainstream positions. Those are literally on 80-20 issues or 90-10 issues, they're embracing the 10% and the 20% issues. And it's because, look, and on foreign policy, I mean, there is a real and cognizable pro-Hamas wing of the Democrat Party. That didn't used to be part of politics, but on every issue, by the way, you look at Chris Van Hollen flies down to El Salvador to meet with an MS-13 gang member, a human trafficker, a repeat criminal who beat his wife, because they've decided, what appeases the radicals is to say, elect Democrats, and we will release more illegal immigrant gang members in your communities. Letting murderers and rapists go is not a mainstream position, but that's driving the Democrats right now.
One thing you said on the floor this week, I think, is telling, which is that the Democrats in general right now count on the mainstream media running cover for them.
Yep.
Because even on the shutdown, this is the very fact that all they had to do was get 8 of them to vote to end the shutdown. They still were calling it the Trump shutdown.
Yep.
They still were sort of obfuscating the whole thing, made it all confusing. If you spoke to anyone on the street, they would say, "Oh, it's the president." Like, they didn't understand it. So they relied on it. But just my last question on the shutdown, because we could tie it to what we'll talk about next, is when can we expect the Senate to get back to actually debating policy, passing, if we're going to talk about Israel in a little bit, passing funding for Israel, talked about healthcare a few months ago, about medical research that didn't make it under the CDMRP, under the last CR. And, when the Farm Bill is coming up, when is the Senate going to get back to that work? Do we expect it in the spring? Are we going to just have another shutdown?
So look, on a lot of levels, this has been a very, very productive Senate, a very productive Congress. The bulk of what we got done through a process that's called budget reconciliation. Now, what budget reconciliation is doesn't matter much, except that it is the principal exception to the filibuster. So I mentioned before, the ordinary rule is you need 60 votes to move legislation in the Senate. The biggest exception to that is budget reconciliation, which under that authority, you can pass legislation with just 50 votes in the Senate. We passed this summer, and Trump signed into law on July 4th, what was called the One Big Beautiful Bill. Without exaggeration, there are more conservative victories in that bill than any legislation that's ever passed into law. So what did we do in that bill? Well, we extended the Trump tax cuts. We made them permanent. That was a huge deal. If we hadn't acted, there would have been an automatic $4 trillion tax increase at the end of the year. We passed new tax cuts, like no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. That's a big deal. No tax on tips was my legislation that I authored. That's now passed into law. We had the biggest investment in border security in our nation's history, $150 billion to secure the border. We invested $150 billion in rebuilding the military, incredibly important for defending this nation against foreign enemies. And I'll tell you, 2 provisions, both of which I authored, that are a huge, huge deal. We passed the most far-reaching federal school choice program that has ever passed into law. Every taxpayer in America can give up to $1,700 to a scholarship-granting organization in the states, and you get a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for that contribution. Not a deduction, a credit. So the money is effectively free to you. That is going to unleash tens of billions of dollars for kids to go to the school of their choice, to go to private school, parochial school, Jewish day school, putting parents and kids in charge. That is going to transform the lives of millions of kids across the country. And then a second provision, which I also authored, is the so-called Trump accounts. The Trump accounts, they'll start next summer, July 4th. Every child in America will have a personal investment account open for them. Newborn children will have that fund seeded with $1,000. Parents and family and employers can give up to $5,000 a year in a tax-advantage account like a Roth IRA. That money will be invested in the S&P 500, a broad-based equity index. Now, you know about the stock market, but roughly half of Americans don't own a single stock, don't own a single bond. What this is going to do is two things. Give every child in America the benefit of compound growth. And number two, create an entire new generation of capitalists, making all of our kids the owners of the biggest employers in America. That is transformational. And my prediction, Gabe, 10 years from now, those two provisions, school choice and the Trump accounts, will be the single most consequential elements in that bill. We got them both done this summer.
And from a political perspective, I think we were talking about this before, the idea to be able to attack, I think the Republicans should learn a little bit from the success of the Mamdani campaign, which is just talking about affordability. Now, what we do with it, it's a different solution than what socialists would do with it, hopefully, right? But just talking about that, those are issues, kitchen table issues that people care about. Not everybody cares about foreign policy or other things, but there's things that people care about every day. Let's take a plane over, a 12-hour plane ride over from Miami to Israel. I know you're first of all, a big supporter of the state of Israel. We're very appreciative of that as a proud American Jew. But also you're very close to what's happening over there.
Yeah.
Right now, as the war has been winding down, the final bodies are being returned, which is incredible. We saw Hadar Golden's body come out this week, a family we've become close to for many years. Now, phase two of this plan, of the 20-point plan, it seems a little bit difficult, right? Hamas is not disarming. I don't know if anyone believed them to disarm, but at the same time, the president is trying to mount a cleanup and a rebuild effort in Gaza to try to make sure it doesn't become just more refugee camps and just a disaster place. Try to do something with it. There's a UN vote happening next week that's supposed to assist that. Not sure how it goes. What role do you think the U.S. should play in the efforts to rebuild Gaza?
Well, listen, I'm very grateful that the president stepped in and negotiated a peace agreement. And the consequence of the peace agreement is the last of the hostages came home. That's a big deal. It's been more than 2 years. And to bring the hostages home, that needed to happen. I don't think that happens without President Trump directly engaging. Now, going forward in Gaza, the real challenge there is Hamas is a terrorist organization that I believe remains committed to Israel's destruction. That is in Hamas's very charter. That is when they chant from the river to the sea, they mean obliterating the nation of Israel. It is very hard to reach a compromise with someone who wants your death. You know, I'm reminded of during the Obama presidency, there was a editorial cartoon, and it showed the Ayatollah saying, "Death to America." And it showed John Kerry saying, "Can we meet you halfway?"
Yeah.
There's not a viable middle ground with a terrorist organization that is still seeking to murder their opponents. And so, listen, the government of Israel, in the wake of October 7th, pledged to utterly eliminate Hamas, and they've gone a long way to doing so. But I think that the remaining Hamas fighters, it's going to be an ongoing challenge. In terms of the U.S.'s role, I do not think the U.S. should be funding rebuilding Gaza, particularly because what happened in Gaza was the direct result of Hamas's decision to launch a war, to commit one of the greatest atrocities the world has ever seen on October 7th. And that was the direct result. You may well have Arab countries in the Middle East that fund a rebuilding of Gaza if they choose to do so. I think the Trump White House is facilitating that process. But I can tell you I have zero interest in any U.S. taxpayer money going to rebuilding Gaza, and I don't think that's likely to happen.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I spoke to some sources on the ground today there in Israel. That it looks like the plan that the president's trying to lay out now is to put this board of peace, this sort of independent board that's going to manage Gaza, set it up, and then sort of let the ship sail, right? Then the U.S. will pull out and won't be involved. I haven't also on my end haven't heard anything about the U.S. involvement. My next question has to do with the reality of post October 7th.
Yeah.
Post October 7th world, still in the Middle East, talking about that region. Before October 7th, there was a lot of blinders that people put on, sometimes intentionally and sometimes unknowingly, with regards to the players that are on the field there, if we call it as such, like Qatar or Turkey or Egypt or any of the above, or the Palestinian Authority. From my perspective, on October 8th, Prime Minister Netanyahu said nothing can ever be the same, and I think that has to be the case. Now that the war is winding down and the hostages are back, do you think there needs to be accountability for a country like Egypt, for example, where there was a superhighway essentially between Egypt and Gaza, letting all these arms come in, which they definitely knew about, or Qatar, who we know are playing both sides, or Turkey, who's supporting terrorism all over the world as well? Now that the dust is settled, I understood having to play with them to help get this deal done. Do you think that the U.S. should start placing some accountability on these countries?
Look, I think there's a range of accountability that depends upon a range of culpability. So if you look at Qatar, Qatar has actively supported Hamas from the beginning. It has sheltered senior Hamas leaders in Qatar. Qatar has also spent billions of dollars funding anti-Semitic radicals in the United States, infiltrating our universities. I'll tell you, it's been publicly reported. Qatar hired spies to spy on me because they see me as their leading opponent in Washington. I'm actually quite comfortable with that, because enemies of America that seek our death and destruction, I'm not interested in us playing footsie with them. If you look throughout the world, look, Hamas and Hezbollah, both of them, 90% of their funding, more than 90% of their funding, came from Iran. Iran has always been the head of the snake. And you look at what's happened this past year. This past year was incredibly consequential. October 7th, the Bible says what man means for evil, God can use for good. And as horrific as the atrocities carried out on October 7th, we have seen good flow from that, in that it's provided clarity. It's provided clarity for every elected official, for every journalist. Where do you stand? And in my view, this is not a contest where there are shades of gray. This is a contest between good and evil. It's a contest between civilization and barbarism. And we've seen elected officials who make a choice. I mentioned before, in the Democrat Party, there's a very real, cognizable pro-Hamas contingent in the Democrat Party. And that clarity is important. We've also seen Israel utterly decimate Hamas and Hezbollah, and critically, Israel wage a 12-day war against Iran that crippled Iran, that took out Iran's air defenses, that took out the senior leadership of their military, that took out the leadership of the IRGC. And in fact, it really was an amazing testament to the penetration of the Mossad within Iran, that every day they appointed a new head of the IRGC. Within 24 hours, that guy was gone and they had to appoint someone else. That was really consequential. When Prime Minister Netanyahu was in D.C. a few months ago, he and I sat down in Blair House. We smoked a couple of cigars together. There's no smoking in Blair House, but it would be rude. I mean, he was a guest. What kind of host would be rude to his guest? But I mentioned to him then, I said, look, there are real consequences to winning a war, which is what Israel did. Now, critical to winning that war was President Trump's decision to launch a bombing raid to take out Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. That took bunker buster bombs that only the United States had. I'll tell you, there was an enormous battle within the administration. There were voices saying, do not attack Iran. I was telling the president repeatedly, when the Ayatollah says death to America, he means it. and we should act decisively to prevent Iran from being able to carry out that commitment. President Trump did so, and it was absolutely critical, enhancing the safety and security both of the United States and of Israel.
So my final question on this is, what role does Russia's growing aggression in the region play in the U.S.'s decision-making on in the Middle East? Meaning, should the U.S. prioritize getting Russia out? Like, if we're talking about Turkey, the leverage the U.S. is saying, we'll sell you jets as long as you don't buy jets from Russia, right? And there's discussions now with Syria. Giuliani's in the White House this week, I believe. And there's lots of rumblings of the U.S. saying, let's get Russia out of there. So what role does that play in the decision-making for the U.S. policy in the Middle East?
So look, Russia is a malign force in every part of the country where they operate. Russia's a malign force. China's a malign force. They are not our friends. You asked about Turkey. In the first Trump administration, when President Erdogan came from Turkey to the U.S. to meet with President Trump invited 5 senators to join him in that meeting in the Oval Office. I was one of those 5. So I spent 2 hours in the Oval with President Trump and President Erdogan, and it was kind of interesting. I think Erdogan came in thinking that the U.S. Congress was like his parliament, was just a rubber stamp. Whatever Trump said, we would naturally go along. And I got to say, Gabe, this is an unusual meeting. It's unlike any other meeting I've ever been with President Trump. In 2 hours, he spoke maybe 5 to 10 minutes. He was quiet almost the entirety of the meeting.
President Trump was?
President Trump was. And the bulk of the talking was done by the 5 senators. And so what I told Erdogan was 2 things. I said, number one, look, Turkey is an ally. Turkey is a NATO member. We want to remain friends with Turkey. But I said, number one, as long as you have the Russian S-400 missile defense system, you will not get the F-35. And I told Erdogan, I probably have 95 votes in the Senate to deny you the F-35. So you got to choose one or the other. You will not get both because we're not going to train the Russian missile defense system on our own advanced fighter jets. And I said, number two, we're not going to sit quietly by while you exterminate the Kurds. The Kurds have stood by the U.S. repeatedly in military conflict after military conflict, and we're not going to sit there and just watch you murder them. And it was kind of interesting. Trump sort of midway through sort of looks at Erdogan and goes, see what I got to deal with? And it made it very clear. It actually was a little bit of Trump playing good cop, bad cop, and we were very happy to be the bad cops. Unfortunately, Erdogan was not willing to get rid of the S-400, so we cut off the F-35. That was not a bluff. And they were slated to get the F-35, and then they did not. I think Turkey has gone in a negative direction, particularly post-October 7th, and that remains a real challenge for a NATO member to be moving in a direction of encouraging Islamists within their country. That is not good for U.S. national security, and it's something I think the president wants to improve upon.
Thank you for that. And let's talk about something that I know you've been speaking about a lot this last week. It's actually one of the main reasons I wanted to talk to you now. So I'm glad we're lucky enough to grab you, which is the rise of the woke right.
Yeah.
Whatever we want to call them, the far right, the anti-Israel right, the anti-Semitic right. That depends on who you're asking, but you see them. Most people are familiar with them, seeing and hearing Tucker Carlson. I heard you say people should call out names. I've never had a problem calling out names, much to the dismay of many people. But Tucker and Candace, Glenn Greenwald, all these guys that are on, we're talking about radio hosts, but we're also, you can go to Thomas Massie and other members in Congress, in Washington, candidates that we're seeing all over the country. Tell me first, from your perspective, how real is this problem? How much of it is being blown out of proportion? Is this something that is as serious as so many of us think it is?
It is very real, and it is very, very serious. If you step back for a minute, it was about 10 years ago that anti-Semitism began rising in the Democrat Party. And the Democrat leadership essentially did nothing about it. They looked the other way. They thought the problem would solve itself. And it has all but destroyed the Democrat Party. As we talked about before, the pro-Hamas caucus drives the agenda, and the remaining Democrats Many of my colleagues in the Senate are terrified of crossing them. As you noted, Mamdani, you had Kathy Hochul, you had Hakeem Jeffries rushing down to Manhattan to endorse him because they are terrified. That's who drives the party. And many of my Senate colleagues, Senate Democrats, I think they quietly lament what has happened to the party. But almost without exception, they're terrified to say anything. The lone exception is John Fetterman, and that really is an example of the exception proving the rule.
Yeah.
The fact that Fetterman has been so outspoken stands in stark contrast to the remainder of his party. Just this week, Fetterman did an interview where he said, I don't know that it's possible to be a friend of Israel and a Democrat anymore. That's what's happened to that party. Now, it's easy for Republicans to criticize Democrats. That's just part and parcel of politics. But we are seeing the same poison rising on the right. And in the last 6 months, I've seen more anti-Semitism on the right than at any point in my life. We see multiple prominent voices on the right going online and defending Hitler. I mean, it almost should be a joke if you think about, gosh, what do you want to talk about? Adolf Hitler wasn't all that bad. This should not be controversial. And yet it's happening more and more and more. And even more problematically, it is spreading with young people. It is spreading with teenagers. It is spreading with 20-something, particularly young men. It is getting traction, this poison. It's being pushed by TikTok and social media. It's being pushed. Look, the loudest of those voices is Tucker Carlson, but there are many others. They get echoed and amplified. And what is very troubling, if you look, for example, at a couple of recent turning point events, there was one turning point event at Ole Miss that J.D. Vance was there, and a kid gets up and asks this viciously anti-Israel question. The most disturbing thing was the reaction of the crowd. About 20 to 30% of the kids cheered. We saw just a week ago, Eric and Laura Trump were at Auburn. Again, a kid gets up and asks a viciously anti-Israel question. Almost every premise of the question was false. But again, the same reaction, 20 to 30% of the kids cheered. And Gabe, what's troubling to me is this is not Berkeley. This is not Yale. This is not some left-wing enclave. This was Ole Miss, and this was Auburn. This is the deep South, a bunch of frat boys who are 20 years old. And what I worry about, look, we're so polarized right now. We're so tribalized that there's very much a team color sense. And I worry about 18, 19, 20-year-olds who are hearing the message, oh, okay, our team, we hate Israel. That's really dangerous, and it is spreading. And listen, I've resolved I'm going to do everything I can to fight it. I am not going to let the Republican Party be destroyed by this poison that has already destroyed the Democrat Party. And I'm not going to let the country be destroyed, because if we wake up 5 years from now and both parties are viciously anti-Israel, viciously anti-Semitic, by the way, when you are anti-Israel, you know what comes very soon thereafter? Being anti-American. And if you are attacking Jews, very soon thereafter is attacking Christians. Mamdani is the logical progression of it. And it's why you have, listen, not only is Tucker Carlson having on Hitler celebrating whack jobs, but he's also going out of his way to defend jihadists. He's going out of his way. And the progression, so Tucker had one professor on who said, Winston Churchill was the villain of World War II. No, he was not. He had another whack job, a different professor, who said there's a very good argument that America should have intervened in World War II on the side of the Nazis. No, there is not a very good argument that we should have supported the Nazis. He had Nick Fuentes on, who is an unabashed Nazi, and that is not me calling him that. He himself says he thinks Hitler is very, very cool. He says that Hitler was right. And on social media, he says he's on Team Hitler. Well, you know what? If you say you support Adolf Hitler, that means you're a Nazi. And Tucker with each of these witnesses, each of these guests, there are people that said, "Oh, well, the problem is he's platforming Nick Fuentes." I actually don't have a problem with the platforming. I could see it going either way. If he wanted to have him on and really cross-examine him about the grotesque things he said, I'm all for vigorous free speech. And by the way, Tucker does know how to cross-examine people when he wants to. But he spent each of these interviews fawning over them, gazing at them adoringly, nodding. Fuentes at one point said, "I love Stalin." And in fact, he said he celebrates Stalin's birthday. Who in their right mind, A, knows Stalin's birthday? It's one of the most evil people to have ever lived, a mass murderer. And Tucker is just nodding and going along with, "I love Stalin." By the way, it's a quick slide from there to Tucker saying, as he did, that America should apologize to Osama bin Laden's family. No, we should not. Osama bin Laden was a radical jihadist who murdered 3,000 people on September 11th. I'm very glad we took him out. I wish we'd taken him out earlier. Tucker likewise said he doesn't know that Hamas is a terrorist organization. He thinks they might just be a political organization. This is the same Hamas that murdered 1,200 Israelis, that raped little girls and women. And Tucker doesn't know if they're a terrorist organization. He had one show praising Maduro in Venezuela. And his latest, he got mad at President Trump for defending Christians in Nigeria. This is an issue I've been leading on for a long time. More than 50,000 Christians in Nigeria have been murdered since 2009. It is the single worst country on the face of the planet for the largest mass murder of Christians that's being carried out by Boko Haram and other radical Islamist groups. Tucker is dismissing it, saying it's not happening. And there is a slippery slope. When you start out saying you're just worried about Israel, it very quickly slides to Mamdani world of you hate America and you hate capitalism. And we've seen Tucker travel down that descent in a way that I think is really sad.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples that you were going through. I mean, when he had the Christian from Bethlehem talk about how the Israelis are making Christians' life miserable in Bethlehem.
Which is a lie.
Despite the fact that the Israelis don't control Bethlehem, the Palestinian Authority does. And when the Israelis did, they were flourishing. It was about 80% Christian, and then it flipped since the Palestinians took over. The stories are endless. I guess my last question to you, last night I spoke at an event for an organization that's helping train actually Jewish students in self-defense. That's the world we're in today.
Yeah.
And this couple, very well-respected couple, not young, mid-40s, late 40s, came to talk to me after.
That sounds young to me.
That's my age, so I'll take it. So my 18-year-old doesn't think I'm young, but maybe none of my girls think I'm young. But that's
okay. My teenagers say, "Okay, boomer" to me, and I'm like, "Wait a second, I'm Gen X. Don't call me a boomer."
I don't know what I am, but I don't know how to use my kids' TikTok or Snapchat, so I think that immediately just makes me old for them. I'll be 45 next month.
Happy birthday!
Thank you. So now you'll know my birthday. It's not Stalin's birthday. So
glad to hear it.
Yes, I didn't know what it was until Fuentes brought it up. So learned something from him, I guess. This couple comes out to me after the event, after I finish my remarks, and I'm an optimistic person. I'm a realist. I say what's happening, but I say things can get better, and we can work on things. And I give things that are, actions that people can take to try to make things better, both at home, in their community, in politics. That's sort of the angle I take. And they came to me and said, "Listen, we're not political, but we're seeing what's happening on the left. They're gone. The Democrats are gone for Jews. We were Democrats our whole lives." That's what this couple is telling me. And now we're seeing what's happening on the right. Is it time for Jews to leave America? Where's our home here? Where's our political home, right? If we don't have a political home, like you're saying, then how can we stay here? And of course, I gave them my answer, but I thought that would be a great question to ask you.
So look, the only answer is we have to fight and win. Absolutely, Jews have a home in America and have been enormously important in terms of driving prosperity, driving innovation, driving new businesses. You look at the number of Jewish entrepreneurs, the number of Jewish scientists, the number of Jewish Nobel laureates. America is massively richer not just in material senses, but richer in terms of innovations and life-saving medicines and art and culture because of the thriving Jewish community in America. And I will say, when you have universities like Columbia University, when the anti-Semitic protests were going on, one of the rabbis on campus sent an email to all of the Jewish students saying, "Do not come to campus because the university cannot and will not protect you." That is horrific, and it's because the university administrators and far too many of the faculty members side with the viciously anti-Israel and anti-American protesters. And understand, those anti-Semitic protesters, it's not anti-Israel, it is openly anti-Semitic, and they are chanting, that they are chanting things like, "Go back to the ovens." That is not subtle, it is brutal and explicit and open, but they are also burning American flags, and they are openly anti-American. Now, those are being funded. They're being funded, I believe, by Qatar. They're being funded, I believe, by Iran. They may well be being funded by communist China. And then there are leftists in America, many of whom are among the top donors to the Democrat Party, that are paying for them. What I have urged President Trump and the Department of Justice and the FBI is follow the money. I'm not the only one who noticed that the tents at these protests almost all seem to match. There is real money that funded the Black Lives Matter riots across the country several years ago, that funded the anti-Semitic protests, that funded the open borders riots in LA and other cities. There's real money that is tearing down our country. We need to cut off the money. But you know what? You're seeing Jewish students, for example, making the decision not to go to schools like Columbia. And some people say, well, gosh, this is terrible. This is happening all over the place. And I point out, no, it's not. It's happening in blue states with Democrat governors. It's happening in New York. It's happening in New Jersey. It's happening in Connecticut. It's happening in Pennsylvania. It's happening in Illinois. It's happening in California. It's happening in Washington State. Not happening in Florida. Not happening in Texas. We had one day of anti-Semitic protests at the University of Texas. You know what happened? The police showed up, arrested them all,
They were gone.
and it was over. And by the way, when we did that, we discovered roughly half of them had no connection to the university at all. These are radicals. Many of them are communists. They're Marxist or jihadist coming in. By the way, this is the base that just elected Mamdani. But when you have leaders who stand up, you can cut it off. But what I would say, not only to Jews who are feeling is there no place for us, but to any Americans who love our nation's tradition of protecting religious liberty, protecting equal rights, not being Nazis. This should not be a very difficult line to say, let's not be Nazis. If you don't want to see both parties go into the extremes of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel hatred and anti-American hatred, then we've got to fight and we've got to win. I'll tell you, in Congress, most of my Republican colleagues agree with me, but a whole lot of them are afraid to say anything publicly because people like Tucker have really big megaphones. And I'm not going to be silent. And you know what? We've got to win with young people. We've got to go make the case to young people why supporting Israel is unequivocally in America's national security interest. When Israel was taking out Hamas terrorists and Hezbollah terrorists, it keeps America safer because those lunatics murder Americans. They want to murder Americans. When Israel was taking out Iran's air defenses and military leaders, there's a reason the Ayatollah calls Israel the little Satan and America the great Satan. Israel was making America safer, and we support Israel because it is emphatically in our national security interest. But you know what, Gabe? It can't just be you and me talking to each other. We've got to go and make the case to young people. It's why I do my podcast, Verdict with Ted Cruz. We get millions of listeners. It's why I'm engaging very directly in this fight, because the only answer for our country is we've got to fight and win and take it back. And you mentioned you're an optimist. I am too. I believe in America, and I think we can and will take it back.
Senator Ted Cruz, thank you. I know government's not the answer to all of our problems, but certainly can help. And we're glad you're doing what you're doing. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and do all the great things you do to support podcasts. And we'll see you next time.